dropped nucleus inside the vitreous cavity, a high-density one. That's a challenging situation, yet it's very common. It's a challenge the vitreoretinal surgeon has to face. I have again to mention my trip to Canada, where I witnessed Dr. Rezende performing a surgery very, very similar to the one I performed. And that was the source of inspiration for me to perform the surgery, to combine the pars plana vitrectomy, the phacofragmentation, and the Yamane fixation technique. I performed the surgery using the EVA system by Dork, that's a Dutch company. I used the 23 gauge pack, and I had no assistant in the surgery, so I performed the surgery all by myself. Here I'm attaching the chandelier system by Dork, which is the twin light system, because any improvement on the visualization during the surgery would be welcome. I had some technical difficulties to record the surgery because, again, I was alone, and I used the micro-X system, which I think is amazing. It's awesome, but the light sometimes reflects on the nucleus, and it blurs the image. It gives this glare effect. But anyway, there you could see the nucleus. It was a very hard nucleus dropped inside the vitreous cavity. I then performed the most complete vitrectomy I could to relieve the traction around the dropped nucleus. And then I give it a try with the vitrectomy probe. I tried to fragmentate and eat the nucleus, but I quickly realized I would need something stronger. I used the 20 gauge knife to open a sclerotomy and use the phaco tip to eat the nucleus. That's called phacofragmentation inside the vitreous cavity. It is important to notice that you don't have to necessarily first perform the posterior vitreous detachment maneuver and eat the posterior vitreous before you eat the nucleus. You can leave at the moment the posterior vitreous intact because it could serve as a cushion, as a additional protection to the retina against the nucleus. So sooner the other day I was talking about different strategies to address the nucleus. You could, as I performed here, phacofragmentate inside the vitreous cavity. You could levitate the nucleus and perform phacoemulsification on the anterior chamber, or you could simply get it out of the eye through a scleral tunnel. The secret here is to be patient, to be careful. You could use the PFCL to protect the retina, to give an additional protection, but it's not like you're not obligated to do it. In Canada, Dr. Rezende, as he is a master surgeon, he didn't use any PFCL. Here I'm already performing the PVD maneuver, and here I'm indentating the sclera using the Tudorich tip cap to check if there are any tears. And then begins the Yamane. This is a right eye. You can see the infusion is inferior nasal to facilitate the docking of the trailing aptic. I'm using the hydrodissection cannula to mark the conjunctiva as suggested by Dr. Brian Kim, and then the compass to mark 2 millimeters away from the limbus and 2 millimeters again at the other side. A great tip by Dr. Rafael Garcia. He suggested me to turn the infusion off as I'm marking the conjunctiva to make it easier. You know, the retina eye is so wet and sometimes it blurs the marking. Here I'm bending the needle, the first needle. I'm bending, and the bevel always face the aptic as also suggested by Dr. Brian Kim. The first needle, I bended it at 9 millimeters from the tip, and the second one at the base. Here I'm injecting the IOL, and I'm making sure that the leading aptic is resting on the iris surface, and the trailing aptic is outside of the eye. This makes it easier, more intuitive to perform the Yamane. And then I begin the piercing of the sclera, making a tunnel length of 2 millimeters. You have to hold the eye by holding somewhere that is not the conjunctiva. If you hold the eye by holding the conjunctiva, you will move away the conjunctiva from the neutral position, and you will move to the markings, and you will not have a good centralization of the IOL. Here I'm suturing the cornea because I realized the eye was a little bit soft, the IOP was a little bit low, and it would be easier if I sutured the cornea. Do not hold the conjunctiva. Make it sure that the conjunctiva is at the neutral position. For example, I like to hold the eye by holding the trocar, as you can see here. Okay, time to start again. You can see I'm holding the eye by holding the trocar with the forceps. I perform the tunnel length of 2 millimeters, one mark to the other, and then inside the eye, I perform the docking of the first haptic. I'm having some problems here because the haptic is somewhat attached to the iris, but with a little bit of persistence and perseverance, I succeed the docking of the first haptic. You could see that the bevel is facing the haptic. That's quite important to perform a good docking, and it's quite important also to tell that you can only progress the haptic with the forceps, with the retinal forceps, if the haptic is straight, in a straight presentation. If you try to progress the haptic in a curved presentation, the haptic will bend, the haptic will kink. And now I let loose the leading haptic and needle complex. I have to let it loose to have more space to work with the other haptic. It's important, this detail. Due to patient anatomic difficulties, I'm making the scleral tunnel with my right hand and then exchanging to my left hand, but usually I make the tunnel with my left hand and then I use my right hand to perform the docking of the trailing haptic. And here I'm performing the docking of the trailing haptic. In Yamane, the bevel has to face the orientation of the haptic so that the haptic will go against the bevel wall and it will automatically make a straight configuration. And then you can progress the haptic and then your docking will be successful. And then it's time to pull away from the eye the trailing haptic needle complex. It is important to make the same trajectory that you have performed go inside the eye so that the haptic can safely come outside of the eye. Here I'm using the forceps, the McPherson forceps to hold the haptic, and then I'm performing the flange. As you are gaining more experience with Yamane, you will find out the ideal flange length. Some surgeons like to use a compass to measure the flange that they want to make. And now I bring outside of the eye the leading haptic. So I bevel first the leading haptic, but at the end, I bring outside of the eye the leading haptic. And that's why I bend the needle at 9 millimeters from the tip. Because if I bend the needle at 9 millimeters from the tip, I can leave it inside the eye, inside the vitreous cavity, attached to the haptic. Whereas, regarding the trailing haptic, I bend the needle at the base. Because as soon as I dock the trailing haptic, I'm going outside of the eye with the trailing haptic. And then I proceed to go outside of the eye with the leading haptic. And then I perform the flange, and that's it. That's for safety measures, you know. It all began 2 years ago, where I attended this course in São Paulo by COEP, and here it's a Yamane I performed the day before, and the Yamane I perform in this video. Finally, I would like to thank my brother, Dr. Jair, and my uncle, Dr. Nildo. Without them, I would never be an ophthalmologist. So you both are a great deal of inspiration to me. The Yamane technique by Dr. Shin Yamane is an amazing technique. It demands some growing pains, patience, perseverance, persistence, a lot of attention to detail, but at the end of the learning curve awaits the opportunity to offer to your patient a more abbreviated surgical time. And that's where, in my opinion, Yamane really shines. In tough cases, in long cases, Yamane offers you the possibility to offer to your patient a more abbreviated surgical time. You can address all the patient's problems in one single procedure instead of having to perform multiple procedures. That's where Yamane shines. Thank you.